Hey folks, and welcome back to Dungeons and Drybrushing. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today. I feel like I've been saying that a lot lately, trying a lot of different types of videos. But with the D&D movie just having released, and getting good reviews and looking like it's going to do quite well. Now, I haven't seen it yet, don't hold me to this, but I think that there's a possibility that we're going to get an influx of new players again, or at least some people who are tangentially interested in D&D that might actually want to try it. Which means that some of you out there as DMs might be dealing with groups of new players, or you might be a first-time DM wondering how to run a game for your friends. I've wanted to do a video like this for a little while actually, and with all those things coming together at the same time, I thought it was sort of now or never for a video about first-time DM tips and getting new players into the game and how to make sure that they have a great experience with Dungeons and Dragons for their first time. Let's get started. Alright, so you've got some players who've never played D&D before, and it's going to be your responsibility to bring them into that world for the first time. So what do? The first thing I want to mention is Session 0. You want to make sure to do this without question. Now it doesn't have to be complicated, especially with first-time players, but this is where you're going to help them make their characters and give them some idea of what to expect at your table. Now, you can also talk about expectations here for the players. What do they like? Do they want a lot of combat? Do they want a lot of intrigue, a lot of social interaction, a lot of mystery? Do they want traps and puzzles? Dungeon diving? Or, social events, going to balls and things like that and having political intrigue? Now, in my game, personally, I do all of those things in different amounts depending on the campaign, but they're always all present. So I'd make sure to set the expectation at Session 0 that these are all things that could come up. Additionally, this is going to be the first time that you want to introduce them to the mechanics of rolling a d20. Explain it to them, and the idea of advantage and disadvantage. In fact, don't worry about the rules too much outside of that. Okay, I think I just heard some of your buttholes clench. What I mean is, they're first-time players. They're not going to get all the mechanics in one session, and you should try to make them. If they can walk away with the idea that you roll a d20 to resolve tasks, and what advantage and disadvantage are, that's fantastic, you did great. On top of that, before you can sit down and plan your actual first session with your new players, you have to know what you're trying to achieve yourself as a DM. For first-time players, the list of goals is simple. You want everyone to learn the basic rules, you want everyone to have a good time, and you want the player characters and the players themselves to feel like they had agency in the game, that the decisions they made affected things around them and changed the outcome. Even if those of us behind the curtain know that that's sort of. So with that in mind, we're going to do a 5-room dungeon. Alright, so for those of you who already know this, you can skip forward a little bit, but for everyone else, the 5-room dungeon is the most basic, simple, and effective construct for dungeons that there is. Now, when I say 5 rooms, I don't literally mean a building with 5 rooms in it, though it can be that. What I mean is 5 encounters, 5 objectives, 5 difficulties to overcome. That's the heart of the 5-room dungeon. 5 things happen in the session. So what these 5 things are is going to vary table to table, campaign to campaign, and based on what you established in Session 0, here's what happens at your table. This is where you formulate those ideas more fully. Encounter 1 for me is going to be a social encounter. The second encounter is going to be our first combat of the session. For encounter 3, we're going to mix it up, we're going to do some traps. Encounter 4 is going to be our second and different combat encounter, and we'll get into more details about what makes it different when we get there. And encounter 5 is going to be the treasure room and a simple puzzle. Now for me personally, when I'm starting with new players, I do like to start at level 1. I know some people will say that the defining features of a class don't open up until level 3, so you should start them there. That's not true. These people already have an entire game system to learn. We don't want to give them more rules on top of that, and we definitely don't want to give them combat encounters that are balanced around 3rd level players who have access to these abilities and know how to use them, and instead throw them at first timers. That's not fair. So we start at level 1. I like to start with a basic, easy to understand setup that you can kind of throw at first time players without bogging them down too much. For me, that's usually, hey, you're applying to join the Adventurers Guild. You guys don't know each other. Who you are and how you got here is your own business to share with each other as you see fit, or when you finally make it up. But the important part is you're all working together to further your ambitions, to get through this dungeon that they're giving you to run through. And let's be honest, you're doing it for gold, aren't you? It's always the gold. This setup is simple, yeah, but it gets the players to work together. It gives them, no matter what their backgrounds are, no matter who their characters are, it gives them a really simple and elegant reason to work together for at least the one session that you know you're going to get out of this. So you explain to them, the Adventurers Guild has told you that a local ruin has been infested by insert enemy of your choice here. I'm going to use cultists. It could be anything though. It could be kobolds, it could be goblins, whatever. Any low-level threat is fine. We're not going to use the stat blocks from the book in the first session anyways. Did I just hear buttholes clenching again? So I've gone with cultists. Some cultists have taken over a local dwarven ruin. That's what we're going to go with. Dwarven ruins, cultists, no problem. The Adventurers Guild wants this cleaned out. They know that the group is already in bad shape, and so it's a really easy target to see if you've got what it takes to make it in the guild. Okay, so we've got a ruin, and we've got an objective for our players to clear out these cultists that have taken up residence there. No problem. Let's give it an interesting setting. I'm going to go with a swamp. No particular reason, you could do anything. I think swamps are a good place to start though, because they give the DM a lot to work with. There's bad smells, there's, it's hot, it's sticky, it's wet, it's unfortunate. You can make the adventurers uncomfortable. There's a lot to describe and hearing. You've got bugs buzzing by your ears and flickering against your skin. You can hear, the call of wild animals, running water. There's just a lot to work with in that kind of environment. So, I said the first room of our 5-room dungeon is actually going to be a social encounter. So what's that going to be? Well, it's a representative from the guild. He's waiting at the very edge of the swamp. He doesn't want to be there. He's not happy to see you, doesn't particularly like you, but you give your players a chance to make some social rolls to see if they can win this guy over. Maybe get a little more gold out of him, even a potion, maybe some tips about what they might expect to find in the dungeon. This is a good chance to teach your players to use those other skills that their characters have, especially if social encounters are going to be a regular part of your campaign. You meet this surly guy at the edge of the swamp, and he doesn't want to see you, he doesn't like you, he hates and is resentful of the fact that he's waiting in a swamp for you, for a bunch of amateurs to do something that he could probably do in a half hour, whatever. So let your players crack some jokes, make some dumb references, whatever it is they want to do. Get them to roll dice on perception and investigation and see if they can get anything out of this guy. And as long as they do okay, you should let them. Let them have an effect on the adventure in that way. Teach them that, in these early parts of the game, before you get into story, and the story can be rewarding in its own way, there are other rewards for engaging in social behaviors instead of just murder hoboing your way through the entire setting. So at length, and with some appropriate roles, our guild rep warns the players about the things in the swamp, the wildlife. We're going to use, you can use spiders, we'll do spiders. Any kind of giant insect would be fine though. If you want to do centipedes, something like that, anything that can swarm, you could even do swamp rats. Anyway, I'm going to use spider swarms because I happen to have some spider swarm models that I made on my shelf over there. So that's perfect. And what do you know? That's our first combat encounter. Who could have imagined? It's spiders. Now the players, they're going to feel like they're forewarned because they got the information out of the rep when he didn't want to tell them. So they feel like they did something smart, and when the spiders attack, they're ready for it. They're trudging through the swamp, or you can put them in a little boat or something like that, and just have the spiders drop on them from overhead, however you want to do it. The insect swarm stat block in the book is only a CR half creature. So we're going to use that stat block more or less. but just be careful about how much damage you're doing to the players. They're level 1, and depending on what classes they roll, they might be pretty fragile. So doing any real damage to them at this point and putting them in serious danger isn't a good idea. This first fight is literally just to show them how the fight mechanics work. Don't worry about sticking to the rules, don't worry about sticking to the stats as they're written. Just make sure they get the fight mechanics. That's all that matters in this encounter. They have a good time, they kill some spiders, they learn how the fighting works. So that's already 2 of our 5 encounters done. The players have gotten into the swamp, they've talked to the guild rep, they've defeated the local wildlife, and they find the dwarven ruin. So now we get into traps. These cultists who have held up in this swamp, they're not that smart. I mean, what first level enemy is that smart? Well, cultist is that smart. But these guys aren't bright, but they are, cunning, crafty, probably pretty evil. With, they like to hurt people. So they've created some traps at the entrance of the dwarven ruin. In fact, I might even make, in the context of a swamp, I might even make the first trap a slick, mildewy set of stairs that the players try to go down, and if they're not careful, if they don't try to detect it and they fail their acrobatics or athletics check, they slide down the stairs. It's just going to be like 1d4 damage as they go down the steps. It's not enough to hurt them, but it is enough to say, hey guys, wake up, pay attention, you have to check your surroundings, there's traps here. There are difficulties you're going to encounter and disarm that you cannot do it with just a sword or a fireball or whatever it is that you've got. You're going to have to pay attention and be careful. But again though, these are first-time players, so I wouldn't do anything too elaborate. In fact, I wouldn't do anything that they haven't seen in a fantasy movie before, or a game. Do something like spike traps and an arrow trap in the hallway that's leading, the first hallway leading out from the door. So you've got your slick set of stairs, that's hard to say, slick set of stairs going down, assuming they make it in one piece, then you've got some spike traps and arrow traps down there. Nothing that's going to kill them, don't make the rules too difficult. And if you've got a rogue or a bard or a ranger in the party, this is the time to give them that cue and say, hey, could you roll perception for me? Something like that, to instigate the idea that they can actively use their own skills to do this. So they make it past the traps, maybe having taken a little damage here and there. And you could throw some nasty descriptions on top of this if you want to. You're in a swamp in a sunken dwarven ruin. You're ankle deep in fetid, muddy water. There's disgusting bugs crawling all around you, trying to slither into your boots, maybe. Make them uncomfortable. Dungeon delving isn't supposed to be nice, it's an adventure. And then, from the hallway up ahead, with a pretty mild perception check, they can hear voices. These are going to be our cultists, or goblins, or whatever you've chosen. Now, the stats for this, we're not going to use stat blocks from the books for this. Every monster that they encounter inside the dungeon, every cultist or whatever it is going to have, 8 hit points, and it's going to do 1d4 damage. That's it. That's all. Now you can explain this later if you have to. These cultists were hanging out in the jungle. They were hiding there. They were just the remnants of a larger group. They're not in good shape. You could even have the characters make perception checks and notice things like you can tell by the algae at the hem of their robes and their pallid skin that they've been hanging out in the swamp too long. They haven't been eating well. They're not doing a good job of foraging. When they pull their blades, they're rusted and slick looking, like they're damp. These aren't people who are taking care of themselves or their equipment, so you don't have to give them full stat blocks. And again, don't tell your players that part. They just know they're fighting cultists. You're the only one who knows that there's no real threat here. So you can use this fight to establish how combat works in your campaign. Now personally, I like when my players do things like improvise, swing off chandeliers, or blow up a barrel of oil that was nearby, or just use it to slick the ground so that the enemies have difficult terrain. I like that kind of thing, so I try to throw a couple things into this fight to make that obvious, or to make that possible at least. And again, give them perception checks and let them notice, oh, there's a barrel in the corner that's leaking some kind of black fluid. Intrigue them, make it a mystery, they'll investigate it themselves and figure out how to use it to their advantage. So in this fight, I would do maybe the barrel of oil, and then I would take some stone pillars that they can maybe push over on top of the cultists with a strength check. Something simple like that. Now this is going to be the biggest fight in the 5-room dungeon. It's the last fight, in fact. We're going to throw a bunch of roped cultists at the players and just let them knock them down, basically. The reason for that is that you do not kill characters in the first session. Ever. Alright, if you've agreed ahead of time to play an old school meat grinder type dungeon, then sure, but I can't imagine that being a good experience for a first time player, and I don't really think that's the way to go. But hey, to each their own. The fact is, if you've gone through the work of doing a session 0 and creating this character, of having them think about it, maybe even pick out a miniature you have, or if they've wanted to purchase one of their own to use for their character, then they're already starting to form an attachment. And if they are starting to do that and they come into the first big fight and you chop the character's head off, you've ruined D&D for that person. That feels crappy. It feels like the first thing you did was screw up and make a monumental mistake. So we don't kill characters. Not in the first session, not for first-timers. Everyone has a good time at the table. That's the rule for DMing for first-time players. Everyone has a good time. So what if that means they don't take it seriously? They don't like the type of campaign you're trying to run or something like that? Well, that happens. A lot of the time, first-time players, it can be a little awkward to play D&D, and first-timers might tend towards comedy to alleviate that awkward tension. That's fine. That's fine. It should be funny. You're allowed to be funny. And look, if it ends up not being the type of game you want to run, you don't ever have to do this again. You're not obligated. You can do whatever you want. But this first-time session, going ahead and killing players, don't do it. Bad idea. By that I mean killing characters. And you shouldn't kill the players under any circumstance. Not even the one who refuses to use a coaster. Okay, so for our 4th room, your players destroy the cultists. Maybe they push a pillar over onto one. That's something they're going to remember in the future. Maybe they blow up the barrel of oil or just use it as an oil slick. Again, that's something that's going to leave an impression, and it's something that is going to make them feel like they had agency. They did something, they affected the world in an interesting way, because as far as they know, they came up with those ideas on their own. All you did was put a barrel in the corner. You didn't tell them to blow it up, right? So as far as they're concerned, that was them, not you, and they had a great time. They affected the world, they beat up the cultists, and they move into the last room, encounter 5 of the 5-room dungeon. In the last room, you see maybe, well, we said it was a dwarven ruin, so you're going to see the remains of some long-dead dwarves. A place where they maybe had their last stand, in a conflict with, who knows, history has forgotten. Unless one of your characters rolls really well, in which case, go ahead and make something up. It was a conflict with hobgoblins. Well, no, happened 400 years ago. Whatever. You can make it up or set it into your setting however is appropriate. The point is, you see these ancient mysterious things, armor that's so destroyed you can't use it, rotted cloth, bodies that are little more than bone at this point. And it looks like they had some treasures and things here at one point, but it's all been scraped clean. This is a very old ruin. Adventurers have been here before. They took out everything of worth. Or did they? Have your players make some rolls, or if they instigate it, then even better, and make it feel like, oh wow, you caught me out here, there's a secret. You find a hidden compartment behind a loose piece of stone maybe, or you could put this behind a puzzle, like a really simple puzzle, to let them figure it out on their own. They find some small dwarven trinket or treasure that the guild didn't even know was there, so that just goes straight in your pocket, and you can leave the swamp. That's essentially the end of our 5-room dungeon. It gives you a social encounter, 2 combat encounters, traps, and puzzles. It also gives you a little treasure for your players. On top of that, all of this is designed so that your players feel like they have agency in what they're doing. They're changing outcomes, and they're deciding their own destiny for their characters. And that's really what you want for your new players. This also gives you an opportunity to introduce them to, like I said, how your table works as a DM, what your style is, what you expect from your players, and the kind of opportunities that you give your players to take advantage of those things. For me, this has all of the elements that my campaigns have. A little bit of story, some intrigue, social encounters, traps, puzzles, and combat. It also completely fulfills your goals as a first-time player DM, which is that you want the players to have a good time, you want them to walk away with the very basics of the rules, and you want them to feel like they had agency and made changes in the world. Now, does doing things this way mean that every player is going to enjoy it and come back for more? No, of course not. D&D is not for everyone. Tabletop games in general aren't for everyone. And sometimes maybe someone prefers something like Shadowrun or something sci-fi instead of fantasy. That's fine too. But this does make sure that everyone who comes to your table to try this for a first-time experience has a good time and walks away with some fun memories. And that's really what D&D is about, making fun memories with your friends, telling cool stories, and having adventures. Now, you may not remember all the specifics later on, but if you're a first-time player and you're the one who gets the information about the spiders from the guild rep, you're going to remember that, that was so cool, I interrogated that guy and we got that information about the spiders, so we were ready when they dropped down on us. Now, as a DM, you know that mechanically it made no difference. But that doesn't matter. They felt prepared, they felt like they did something cool. That's what matters. Or if you're the one who thinks to blow up the barrel of oil and that lights a cultist on fire and sends him screaming through the cave and everyone else screams in terror and looks afraid and backs off. Now, again, we know mechanically no different, but that's a cool memory for that player. And when they think of D&D, when they think of, do I want to do another game of this, do I want to have another session, they're going to think, oh man, that was so cool, I blew up that barrel, the guy was on fire. Memories that will last, things they can recall later, battle stories to tell. And for a first-time session, that's pretty good. Alright guys, so that's about it for this one. Just a quick video today, giving out some basic structure and tips for DMing first-time players. Nothing too crazy or complicated, but thank you for watching. Please hit like and subscribe. There is always more content on the way, and if you could recommend this to anyone you know who might enjoy the channel, it really does help the channel to grow, and I really appreciate it. Thank you guys for leaving all the awesome comments and for watching as well. And I'll see you on the next one.